started then. Hoping everybody can hear me through the mask. We'll go ahead and get started with the engineering committee for February 16th of 2021. Doug Roderick, interim engineering manager. We'll go ahead and open it up for any public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we see any? No hands? Was it star 9? Yeah. Star 9? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. First item, which is approve the minutes from the January 19th meeting.
Approve.
Yeah, we're good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Any public comment on item number 1? Seeing none, go ahead and approve those minutes. We'll close item number 1 and move on to item number 2, which is our status report update. We talked about last time. We kind of went through all of them last time, right, to bring kind of everybody up to speed. So now on this one, we're just going to go through ones that we've had some changes to since our last one. So we won't literally go through every line by line. If you have a question, feel free to ask. And then we've got a couple of pictures we'll just show of a couple projects under construction, just so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on out there for some of these projects. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Doug, could I make a request?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, after the discussion of the projects, if we could talk about what you and Greg believe are the most important aspects of this. God dang, this thing is tough. It's suffocating. I have to switch masks. I'm sorry. Could we talk about what you feel are the most important positive aspects of this committee that should be carried forth in the new committee structure?
Sure.
And I that might be like we just take that for granted, but being new to this committee, I don't know what its contributions were historically, and I'd like to be able to continue the positive aspects of this committee going forward. And you might know that. I'd just like to be explicit about that.
Okay. Yeah, we could do that. And actually, at the end of my section, there's actually another project item that we're going to talk about briefly, so it'll kind of tie into some of the things we use the engineering committee for in terms of some of the positive aspects of it.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
And my question, I think I asked it last month, but I'm going to re-ask it, is the cost allocation number at the top. I assume that's a number out of the budget. It's not I don't know what to say. It's already a budgeted number for these, not for the construction itself, but for the planning, design, and such. Is that correct? Or like down on raw water, where construction is included, is that? I'm confused about how these things get funded. At what time do these things get funded? So is that specifically down there? Is that construction item included in that
Yes.
Allocation?
Correct. So that 1.2 million you see there is the budget number. So it would have any construction costs that we do for these projects would be billed against that.
So each list
correct.
That's funding whatever it says is going on there.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the only difference is when you get to the non-programmatic section, there's a number there, but those projects are specific in terms of being approved and the value amount for the budget.
So like a big, like Combi Phase 1.
Like Combi Phase 1, right, exactly.
Non-programmatic.
Correct.
It had special funding, it's handled.
So if we don't build one of those projects and want to use it somewhere else, that would be something we would have to come to the board to address.
Okay.
Whereas in the raw water systems, if I don't finish number 1 and I decide to move to number 2 and build that one, we would just do that through our internal process because the overall program's already been budgeted by the board.
But it would come to the committee at this level and for review or for
prioritization.
What's that?
Prioritization.
Or just say this is what we're doing. Update.
Yeah, it would be an update, right? Saying that we've been working on this item, we've run into a snag, whether it's a CEQA issue or a right-of-way issue.
Right.
So we've put that on hold while we deal with that, and instead we're going to jump to this next one.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First one, on page 1 here, is the extended CEQA, that's the Banner Cascade Canal. We have asked for a proposal from Stantec to do the final monitoring. We have to do 2-year monitoring for the Lower Cascade Canal and the Upper Grass Valley Canal canopy study. That was part of our environmental document and the mitigations to do that. So every 2 years, we've been putting together that report, and then we present that to the board, and this would be the same thing. You'd be coming to the board once Stantec does their study to identify the results of that study, the canopy study, et cetera. That was part of the requirements that was agreed to in the EIR, when the board adopted the EIR.
For the new, Cascade
Pipeline,
pipeline?
yeah, correct.
Okay.
Right.
Because we're still watering that ditch as part of that ditch.
Yeah, correct, right, it's just less flows, et cetera, right, so anyway, this should be the final year that we have to do that for the requirements of the EIR. So that'll get done, and then we'll bring that to the board at some point later this year, the results of that study. Pipeline replacement, really the only one that has changed is down on, number 6, which is, Willora Acres. Our survey guys are out there now getting all that survey work finished up. So they've been active out there the last week, running out there, taking survey shots to get that put together so that we can start the design process for that. Next one down would be in raw water systems. Number 1, which is Doty North. The steel pipes installed, majority of the ductile irons installed. We expect that project to be hopefully wrapped up at the end of this month. So by the first week in March, we should be done for the most part out there and be ready to flow test and be ready for water season come April. And Joanne, if you can get on those pictures, show you a couple pictures of that project. Yeah, please. Nope. Scroll down. Don't look at those yet, we'll look at those later.
Don't look at this.
Yeah, keep your eyes closed until we get to the...
Oh, but they're great pictures.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so here's just a couple pictures. What you'll see to the left is the original Doty siphon that was installed in the late 40s, early 50s. It was in need of replacement. It's also undersized in terms of our raw water master plan. So this canal has a moratorium on it. Once this project is finished, that moratorium will be lifted. So those customers will be sent a letter saying that there would be water available for them to purchase this coming irrigation season. This is crossing Doty Ravine. It's not a very large project. It's a very sensitive project in terms of it being Doty Ravine, which is salmon habitat. So we've got to be extra careful when we're working in there. The new siphon is the one you see to the right. Next picture.
So this is Placer County, correct?
Yeah, this is Placer County. This is a little closer shot. You can see the existing one there, the new one being constructed, the footings were in place. Biggest thing on that was we do it before Mother Nature does something with Doty Ravine because it's a very flashy system. It can rise very quickly and then go right back down. So once we got those footings installed and the pipe set, you're pretty comfortable. We can get things done in time. Next one. I think this is kind of showing the idea that there's the ravine right there. I'm not sure where that one goes. The next one.
There's the pipe across it.
There's a pipe across it. This is just kind of a close-up of the footings. We had to install a couple of footings in less than perfect soil conditions, but we got those installed and we're ready to go. Next one. This is just looking back. We're starting to slowly work the grade back on the upstream side. There's a pipe. The ductile line's already been installed there and has been buried, and now they're in the process of grading that all back out. And then this is where it'll daylight back the end of the canal, and then be moving forward once they build the head wall. I think they got the pipe up to that spot now. This was also a very sensitive area in terms of cultural resources, so we were very limited in the area in which we could work as well. So, and we had to have a monitor on site when we were doing digging work. Didn't have to be there every day, but they had to be there while we were digging. Make sure if we found any artifacts, et cetera. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Okay.
So a question.
Yeah.
So, I think this is a great example of the conditions that you work under, we work under, and, the district's interest in expanding water service, and that it's not just easy peasy, and, so I'm wondering, I know we do a good job with our communication strategy, but this is a great story to me, and you have great pictures, and I bet you have some before pictures that show the, ancient system, and the fact that we're expanding water service. So and I know we do press releases, so I'm not suggesting we don't do anything. I just wonder, how can we help to get the story out? Because this is what ratepayer money is going toward.
Right, and this excellent question. This is something where, like, when the project's finished, I mean, I guess we can also say it while we're doing it, but once we've finished the project, right, that could be a release that we send out saying this project has been completed, it's going to lift moratoriums, made improvements, et cetera. And that would be a good time to do that as well.
So you're talking about how do we get this information to the community? Who is going to want to care about it? It's kind of a funny thing. I mean, we've never really, NID as a communications strategy, we've never really talked about the work that we do. The millions, the hundreds of miles of pipeline that we have, the canal structures that we have, the amount of effort and time it takes to monitor, bring the water down, the hydroelectric facilities, what we're doing there, and the rest. So it's kind of a monumental shift in the last, 4 or 5 years of trying to get the word out to the community. We have a waterways tool, we have a pipeline tool, we have, in terms of communications out to both staff and the public. There's press releases, there's social media, there's just a lot of information to put out there, and I totally agree with you. Every one of these projects that are on this list are super incredible stories.
Right.
They are.
Told one way or another.
Yes, they are.
Right?
Yeah.
And they back up that whole concept of the NID budget and the fiscal priorities and the fiscal management of NID, the project priorities, why we're doing certain capital improvements to certain projects, why we have to bond for certain things. I hear you. I don't have a good answer for you, but there's definitely ways that our limited communications opportunities, try to maximize our effort in the community to tell the story and to tell it so that people can, feel good about it and understand it. Part of it is that we're so large, right? I mean, this is a pipeline siphon that's for not a huge percentage percentage of our population that we serve. Not that has, that's a problem, but there's just so many other elements that we do on a daily basis, and finding those great stories, getting the photos. But like Doug says, I think being able to communicate with those potential customers that are downstream that says, you've been on a moratorium for 30 plus years.
Right.
You may now be able to get service. That's huge for like 15 people.
Yeah, it is big for them. That's right.
But it's huge.
Gold.
It's massive for them.
Yeah.
It's huge, potentially life-changing, sort of community-changing event.
But I've felt the same way about Comey South since we visited that first time, going, okay, here's an out-of-sight, out-of-mind, huge project.
Yeah.
The benefits, and I think Rich pointed out that half our irrigation water goes to that pipe. And yet, how many in the community even know it's going on, right? How many, look, when we hear complaints about how massive the budget is or how much money it takes, that those projects take a lot of money, right?
Right. I'm just wondering, we have bills coming out for the irrigation water. Maybe an idea would be to include a letter from you, Greg, to just highlight some of the accomplishments of the district and the ways that water systems have been expanded. And because I think that as we anticipate rate increases, we anticipate them occurring at a dollar value, hitting raw water users more heavily than treated water customers on kind of a bill basis or dollar basis. And maybe a way of, maybe with some pictures and things, but just to take advantage of that mailing that you already have going out and add another sheet or two and try to get people's attention about the accomplishments like this and investments like this. So anyway, it's just an idea, and I was thinking when we were talking that we have that mailing coming out soon, and I just think people would benefit from better understanding this is where your dollars go.
Yeah.
And you might not be one of the 15, or maybe the people, that example you gave, Chris, is a good one, where half of our irrigation water goes through that pipeline. That's a really good example of infrastructure investment. Anyway, just an idea. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Okay, next one is number 3 in the raw water improvement system, which is the South Yuba Canal repair and upgrades. This is the study that GHD is doing for us. We have received the initial condition assessment and their kind of the report outline overview, so we're in the process of looking at that now. Once we get that complete document done, we'll bring that to the board and have a presentation on the results of that. We expect that in May, probably. That's the South Yuba Canal?
That was a consultant's report. What was the name of the consultant?
GHD? GHD. Yeah, I know.
I remember when we talked about doing that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll be bringing that to the full board once that report's complete, but we just recently received some of their initial information, so we'll start to review that and go through that process. So that'll be coming to the board in the future.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one, the last one on that page, which is the Haight Canal siphon replacement. We went ahead and made some improvements in the siphon number 1 without actually replacing it due to the location on an existing homeowner's dam/pond. We were concerned about being able to work in there. So in the short term, we made some additional improvements and removed a culvert, did a flow test. We actually could get more water down it. And so the moratorium through that stretch actually will be lifted. So now we'll work on the tail end of the project, which is siphon number 6. But we actually had maintenance go out there and do some work with engineering's help, and we got some additional flow through there, so that allowed us to lift the moratorium to get folks water while we continue to figure out how we're going to go about addressing and replacing that pipeline. Thanks. Okay, so the next one I'll go to is the non-programmatic, which is number 7 there. So the first one is the Comby Phase 1. I just wanted to show a couple pictures. I think you guys have both been out there. We're still on track, hopefully to have the pipe installed by the first week in March. And then we hope to have an outage probably the 3rd week of March to tie that all back together and start flowing water. So we'll be ready to go by April 1st to be able to do that. It's going to start at the beginning again, probably. Go ahead, let me just open it up so we just see the... Well, you had it just as a slideshow, so it shows the whole screen versus... There you go. No, Gimme won't look at that. Oh, shoot, look at that. You on the first one there? Yep. Yep, all right. Just a couple photos of Phase 1. They're wrapping up the pipeline. This is our spill structure, which is when you first come down the hill there where I took you direct to hole. This is a spill structure, so when the canal overtops or it backs up, we can push water out the side through the existing spill that was there, that pipe that runs down to the river. kind of a complicated little structure to build. So they got the pipe in there, down the foreman around it to pour it. Next one. This is at the bottom end, which is the siphon structure is just past that point there. So they're digging to work their way back. They did run into some rock in that stretch, so we're having to hit the rock a little harder through there. Next picture. And you can see we got pretty limited space, especially now that we're all condensing to the last 800 foot or so. Everything's piling up. Again, a bunch of rock and material we got to remove because the pipe actually goes underneath all that. So we got to keep moving things around. That's the part that we couldn't get to last time. That's the siphon inlet structure. What you see there is a temporary bypass pipe that's tied in and running into the structure. But that concrete box there, that is the new vault that was built as part of this project.
So it's gonna let water out of the big new pipe into that?
Yeah, so the pipe is underneath that plastic there.
Okay. Okay.
And then that diverts water either directly into there or continues down to the phase 2 to feed the phase 2, which is the Nevada County side. Next picture. So this is kind of just below where that picture was just taken, the last one. So right there to the left is the pipe where it turns and goes into the siphon, into that concrete structure, or it continues on through the 48-inch to feed the phase 2. So this is kind of the end of the box. This is kind of a cool shot, so I thought I'd throw it in there.
So what kind of regulating
structure we have for that?
that word.
Yeah,
Is that what the restriction is right there?
So that restriction that's right in the middle that continues straight.
Okay.
That's the 48-inch that feeds the phase 2.
Okay.
At the end of that, there is a slide gate.
Okay.
We will be able to control flows through that slide gate. And then if it goes into the siphon structure, there's another gate that we control the flow going into the siphon.
Okay.
So that's how they'll regulate the two flows.
So a large portion of the water goes into the siphon?
Correct, majority of the water. The phase 1 goes up to, I think it's in the 40s.
Okay.
It's in the low 40s, I think, is the flow through the phase 1, or the phase 2, and then the rest goes to on the other side.
Okay.
About 100 CFS, give or take. And then here's just kind of a farther picture. You can see the pipeline coming in. That's the spill structure again. So we got the pipe up to that location. So now they're going to work from the other end and work their way back to tie that in. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the pictures.
Yeah.
That's great.
So the next one is also the number 2 on the non-programmatic, which is the Alta Sierra tank replacement. This is one where we're...
Can I go back to the...
Yeah.
So the investment for that project was $20 million?
So the pipeline portion that we're constructing today, right, the contract amount was for $19.6 million.
Okay.
And that was for last year's and this year's combined. I think we paid out about 14, 15, somewhere in there. But we are on track and currently under budget, knock on wood. So we don't expect anything at this point to come out of Abbott. So we're doing pretty good in terms of a $20 million project.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the siphon project was about $7 million that was constructed 3 years ago.
Okay.
Which is the one that goes across the river. That was really the first part of this overall improvement of the Combi Phase 1 system. So Alta Sierra tank. This is the one where we had an existing Hypalon liner and cover. We've actually now, go ahead. Pop that picture up. That's the first one now. Just a couple quick pictures. There's nothing too exciting happening there yet, but there will be. They've got the sub base done. They've got the rock brought in and up to grade. And so now what they're doing is they've dug back and they're installing the inlet outlet drains or inlet outlet pipes that'll be encased in concrete. That'll come up through the floor of the structure. Next one. A couple of those. They just get it formed up, and then we basically pour a big chunk of concrete around that pipe, and then they can come back, finish grade with rock, and then they actually pour the slab over the top of that. Next one. this is just kind of showing, let's go to the next one, that one's not very exciting. So here's where we cut into the berm, and so we're building that tank within the existing berm. The idea is we want to leave that outer edge berm because we're in a very tight residential neighborhood that minimizes how much of the tank that they see, as well as the material. There's some, not so much right here, but as you get around the corner, there's still quite a bit of vegetation that we could keep on the berm to try to minimize the visual impacts of this. Because the tank walls, I think, are 22 feet, 23 feet, somewhere in that range. So
And that dirt wall,
it will stick up above that.
somewhat underneath the ground, or
Yeah,
up here to me.
a good portion of it will be below the grade, and you also have your line of sight. So your berm may be this high, but the homes are down here, so their line of sight is actually quite a bit higher.
Okay.
So even though the tank's above that and quite a bit, that they only still will see a portion of that tank of that sticking above the berm. Is there another? That's the other side of the drain, the inlet and outlet, so the water comes in one end, goes out the other side, so that it stirs as much as possible. We'll also have some mixers in there as well, keep the water stirring. And then that's kind of an overall picture of it.
That's massive.
Yeah, the pictures don't show it as well. It's a 3 million gallon tank that we're going to be building there. So once they start to put the floor down and get the walls up and some of the center columns, that'll be a good time for, you guys want to go out and take a tour of that. It's pretty cool when they start getting some stuff up.
This was a pond with a cover on it.
Yeah, this was basically a liner and cover the shape of that berm that you see.
Okay.
Correct.
So can you walk me through again, what was the rationale for this transition to the tank, and how did you determine the size and all of that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So first is the existing structure, which was the Hypalon liner and cover. It was at the end of its useful life. We had continuous leakage that we're having to go. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but it's basically like a waterbed. If you were to walk out on it, that's what it would feel like, right?
Okay,
You're kind of, and so they have a lot of problems with the drains. Don't work very well on there, so we get a lot of water that sits on top of these. And then if there's pinholes leaks, then we have potential issues with water running in, and then obviously the geese and ducks love to hang out on there, as well as the local kids. So that was the reason to replace it. The state, while they don't not allow them, they discourage them highly because of all the potential issues. So really, if it's a really huge structure, then it could be cost effective to try to put another liner in there. But when we get to sizes like this, then we want to just go to the concrete tank, which has got a 100-year life. It's basically no maintenance. We're not having to do anything with that structure, whereas here we're continually having to maintain it and deal with it. So that was the main reason that we got rid of it. In terms of the sizing, so originally we looked at a 3, a 4, and a 5 million gallon option here at this location. Typically, we like to have more storage in the system. This gives us a better flexibility and better reliability in terms of being able to deliver water to our customers. After the board had already approved the 5 million gallon option for this one, we actually had been doing some additional modeling and work up at the Osborne Hill site, and found that if we just made some improvements to the pipelines coming out of Osborne Hill, that we could utilize that storage a little more in terms of the Alta Sierra improvement, as well as the fact that we had done the Rattlesnake Road pipeline upgrade to allow more water to get pushed down into the Alta Sierra system. We decided to reduce this to a 3 million gallon tank instead of the 5 million gallon tank.
Great. What kind of savings did that generate?
Shoot, I think you're going to ask that.
Well, I can imagine it's
it was a little over $1 million.
Pretty significant.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, I appreciate that you continue to talk about these things so that,
yeah, absolutely.
You're developing the best alternative as the project proceeds.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this system feeds the Alta Sierra, is that the one that's connected down to Lake LaFayette?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's a pretty big, overall, it's a big system.
Yeah, correct. Yep. And this is a design build.
But, pardon me?
We'll have to see that because that's our area, our territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will.
Like I said, once there's a little more things to look at, we'll be happy to take you out there. Pretty cool. So the next one is the third one down on the non-programmatic, which is Hemp Hill. We're still on track to have that draft EIR deliverable April 1st. We did get a very good options analysis done for fish passage, in-stream fish passage, with either a fish ladder or a ripple and pool kind of effect. So we're reviewing that, and that'll be part of the EIR, one of those alternatives will be part of the alternative package that we move forward in with the draft EIR. And we look at it in the same effort as two of the other alternatives, same level of effort in the EIR.
So
will be one of those fish passes.
Just so I'm clear.
Yes.
I understood that, I think last year the board, authorized a study that would remove water from Auburn Ravine. But this seems to imply, that we're looking back to being able to support the flow of water in Auburn Ravine and create that fish passage?
You're thinking of an alternative, of a pipeline, instead of the replacement.
Yeah, which is one of the alternatives that this environmental document is going to look at. It's going to look at a pipeline option, which basically is removal of the structure and then taking the water from a different location to be able to serve those customers. In addition to that, this document's also going to have an in-stream use, which is basically some type of a fish passage, whether it's a ladder or again, the pool and chutes, and there's a couple other terms that escaping me at the moment. But basically, it allows the fish to pass over our structure. We'll still be able to use the structure that will be able to deliver water to our customers. We still continue to run water down Auburn Ravine and then take it out at the Hemphill Canal. And then the third option would be like a infiltration gallery. We've got a pump station on the side where you dig and build a big channel and basically set pipes where you pull water from the subbase of the Auburn Ravine to feed our canal.
Okay.
So this document will look at all the alternatives, and then it's going to take 2 or 3 of these alternatives and move them more forward with equal level of effort in the impacts of these projects, or these alternatives.
Okay, so, and we pick from one of those 3 options?
Yeah, we're going to have these different alternatives, right? And then ultimately the board's going to decide which alternative to choose. And while CEQA doesn't necessarily allow for cost to be an impact in terms of the environmental impacts, we're going to have information on that so that the board can have an understanding of what these different alternatives cost. And then it's ultimately up to the board to decide which project, whether it's the least environmental impactful one, or if it's one that maybe has a little bit more impact, but for other reasons, the board decides to choose that one.
Okay, well, I appreciate that the analysis includes all 3 options. I didn't understand that, so I'm really glad to hear that.
Correct.
We kind of had a reset when we came on the board for this kind of, I won't call it reset, but to get it back on track in this direction. So
yeah,
it's a good thing we're getting there now.
Right. Yeah, part of that settlement that we had, right, was to have a draft document on the street.
Right.
Try to have one by April 1st. So that's
great. Thank you.
Okay, just 2 or 3 more here. Down at the bottom, community investment. So number 1, Loma Rica Drive, and this is one that we had the discussion at the board a little while ago.
Yes.
I can't remember, right, when we talked about the full project versus a portion of it. So we've actually sent out the responses. We've gotten 10 responses back. This project's is not going to be the full project. It's going to be smaller because they're all grouped in the front section, basically. And so once we get the good faith deposits and we have enough where we actually can move forward with it, then we'll bring that to the board with the funding agreements, et cetera. But it's going to be smaller than the full project.
Okay. I appreciate that you looked into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so
I had a communication with the guy. Nobody on their court I think it was
on that one court there.
that one cul-de-sac. They didn't have anybody on there. They wanted to write a letter of opposition. You don't need to oppose it, just don't sign up for it.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
it was a good idea. I still think it's a good idea, but
Yeah, and we
it
give
has to
the-
work this way. too.
Right, like the board had requested that we consider the full project again,
Right.
so we sent out notices to all those folks. What we got back is telling us that it's not gonna be a full project, it's still gonna be a smaller piece.
Yeah, but that's good due
Yeah.
diligence, really good.
Yeah. So the next one, the sediment removal, the reservoir study, sorry. I've got the draft document, so I'm gonna review that now. And then once we clean it up and make some additions, et cetera, then ultimately we'll be bringing that to the board with our discussion and our recommendation on how we wanna move forward with these sediment issues that we have, within all of our reservoirs, both the smaller ones as well as the bigger ones, and the process and the thought and how we move forward from there, right? This came about from my concern about just spending $1 million every year and not necessarily getting the best return for your money, and whether that made sense to continue to do that versus let's look at the bigger picture and have a real plan of attack on how we're gonna deal with these facilities and then move forward with that. So that's what this study will allow us to present to the board.
I think that's a really good approach, Doug. I appreciate that. You're looking at the big picture and then showing us the magnitude of the issue versus doing it onesie-twosie.
Yeah.
I think that's very appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, because some of your bigger reservoirs, like Rollins, is, it's tough to make that pencil out
Yeah.
for the return that you get. The next one is down to engineering O&M. That's the urban and ag plan. We're working on both of those, especially the ag plan at the moment. We've had a draft document. We've made comments and review. We've sent it back to the consultant, so we're working on that. The idea being is that we would present this and be adopted by the board by April 1st, and that we submit it to DWR by April 30th.
Okay.
We do have some real concerns that DWR still has not finalized their guidebook, which means us presenting a document out to the public for review and ultimately to the board for approval may require adjustments or changes if there be additions to the guidebook that we're still waiting to receive. So I'm just struggling a little bit with that. They haven't talked about extending the deadlines, but those are things we gotta start to think about, right? I'd hate to go through this whole process and then have to make changes to a document after the fact and then have to go back and do that whole thing over again. So, we are moving forward with the document. We've just got some concerns that until the guidebook's finalized, how much we wanna push forward with it. So.
And you may or may not recall, that's where we have the two public meetings in advance of the public hearing.
Correct.
And so we've got that scheduled in here for the 3rd and 4th of March.
That's what we're thinking at the moment, the 3rd and 4th of March, we'd have the public meetings, basically saying here is, this is a document, this is what we put into it, these are the assumptions, these are how we developed it. The community can then go forward, make comments, et cetera, and then when we come to the board for a public hearing, incorporate the comments, and then, depending on what document adjustments we need to make, the board can approve it then, or if we have to make adjustments, then come back and bring it to the board for a second approval through a public hearing, which is, the hearing is the requirement of the plan. The public meetings are not. We just added those as just additional public meetings that give the community information when they go to review the document.
I think that's really helpful.
Could you elaborate on this handbook? How often is it updated?
Well,
What's the hang-up? What's that?
Well, it's a 5-year document, right? So,
And we do these
every 5 years.
every 5 years, so
Every 5 years.
this is the right cycle.
Yeah, correct.
But the handbook is lagging and giving information for us to do the plan.
Yeah, so the guidebook has information that we need to have in there, and then it also has information, if you want to add this table or you have other things, right? It helps you make sure you have all the information they need to see in the document and whatever else potentially could be in there. They have their minimum requirements, and then there's additional information if you want to continue to add to that document. And so there's been a draft document out for quite a while, but it was supposed to be finalized. I think originally it was supposed to be filed in December, and then it was supposed to be filed in January. So here we are, still waiting for that document to be finalized to make sure that we have all the minimum requirements in the document that we move forward and
And we
present.
have a deadline for this, our document?
We have a deadline of, has to be adopted by the board by April 1st and submitted by April 30th.
So does every other water agency.
And
Yeah.
every other outfit. Yeah, it's not just
So
us,
we're in a
it's
family
everybody.
there.
So we're in a big family.
Yeah, right, and so, you know, we've heard some inklings that, they may not be real hard and fast in terms of the deadlines, but I think it's a statutory deadline, so making that actual change is quite an event versus just accepting the document a little bit late and not worrying too much about it kind of thing, so, it's just all over the place right now. We're still moving forward to try to meet the April 1st deadline, with reservation that we may be trying to adopt a document that may have to be changed by one or two items, et cetera. It's not gonna be a wholesale change, because we've got a draft document,
Right.
but there may be something in there that got adjusted in the draft, from the draft to the final, that we wouldn't know about until it gets done.
I had seen or read that there was if a water district had not submitted their response by the deadline, that they had up to, I think, 4 months to continue to work on it without penalty, so,
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a, I don't know the specific time frame, but I believe it's, you're supposed to have it by April 30th. I think they have roughly 100 days for DWR to send something back to us to say, hey, you haven't completed your document. And I think we have a certain amount of time, which may be up to 100 days, to respond as to why we're doing it, or we're continuing to work on it, et cetera. Ultimately, they can choose, if you haven't done it, DWR can do it for you and charge you. But there is quite a bit of grace period in there.
yeah.
So that's part of that discussion too, right? Whether April 30th is really that tight a deadline, versus, you know, we're working on it, we're waiting for the final guidebook, we now have it, we can finish up and send it to you, et cetera. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's just it gives you a little bit of flexibility should you need it.
It does, with the caveat that, there is a specific deadline that
We have to work.
if we don't,
Right.
if we don't
Sure,
meet it, we're
absolutely.
in violation,
Otherwise.
we're in
Yeah.
violation of that deadline, whether they try to hold that or be aggressive with the response to it or not.
Yeah.
That's just a risk management thing. What's the likelihood of that happening?
Okay.
We'd like to hold to the deadline, and if they can, if DWR says, oh, you can let that slide, then we'll go from there, but,
Yeah, if you need it, but,
yeah,
yeah.
if we need it, but right now, we're keeping hold of that deadline, and we just don't know if the final document, when it will come out, when it will be fully released. But, yeah, it's just kind of a wait and see, but we've got these dates in plan
Right.
at the moment in terms of getting the public's involvement into the ag management.
So, can you talk a little bit more, we have March 3rd or 4th,
Both.
okay.
If I said or, I apologize.
No, it says here on March 3rd or 4th.
Oh, it does,
And
yeah.
that's what I've been reading
Should be
is
and.
or, so it's an and.
Yeah, we're gonna do it 2 nights.
Okay, that's perfect.
There'll be evening meetings, Zoom meetings,
Okay.
by 6 o'clock.
Perfect.
Where we'll give a presentation, just explain the document and what went in it and the information that's in there, et cetera, and then the public can then take that document between then and the March 24th public hearing, be able to get input and comments, et cetera.
When will the public actually get the document?
We're still working on that. We'd like to get it out slightly before the public meetings. We're in a time crunch, so we're just doing as best we can. If not, it would be right at when we release at the public meeting. We tell them the information that's in there, and then they can go forward and take a look at it. But ideally, we'd like to have it out before that.
How many pages is the document, approximately?
Just the main document without all the appendices. I can't remember, is it 40 or 50 or something?
Okay, so it's a pretty lengthy document.
It is.
Lengthy.
It's a lot of it's boilerplate stuff. There's a lot of, in terms of some of the information in there, because all information that DWR directs as to what has to be in there.
Sure.
The ag plan, even more so, it's more of a look-back document. The urban plan has more projection stuff in there, where, there'll be more public concern and input with regards to projections in the future versus this one, which is really, majority of it is just, this is what we've done the last 5 years.
And then how long will the public have to provide comments before, you need it back in order to do all your work, and so how long will the public have to?
Well, there'll be roughly three to 4 weeks between when the public will get the document and when the hearing will happen.
Okay.
So, we can get comments prior to that and try to make adjustments when we have the public hearing. If we get a bunch of comments during the public hearing, which is part of that process, and if we need to make changes to the document, then we would do that. The last time we did these documents, the board did not approve it at the public hearing. They actually requested they go back and some changes made based on comments from the public, and we did that and then brought it back. I wasn't part of that process, but that's what happened the last time we did these documents. So I could potentially see the same thing happen.
Yeah, the statutory requirement is that it's kind of odd, and it says that the board has to approve the document by April 1st, right?
Yeah.
But then the district has until April 30th to turn it in and submit it to DWR. So there's this odd, period where we've got it set up when we hired the consultant, it was in December, or late November, and then we worked through all the processes. The timeline is just so tight in order to get us to April 1.
Yeah.
To keep that statutory requirement that the board authorizes the plan, but then there's this odd, so at the time it's authorized until you actually have to submit it, there's a 30-day window, which is kind of weird. But we've set it up so that the last board meeting in March we have as a public hearing, but before that, the 3rd and the 4th, that gives the public, and that will give the public at least 3 weeks. We will have given the explanation of what the plan is and all the numbers that go into it, and then those questions and comments can be received throughout March, and then, of course, questions and comments on the public hearing.
Okay. So we will encourage them to give the comments in that intervening time, so you have a chance to consider them.
But we understand as part of the process, right, that the comments may happen at the public hearing.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
It seems like the risk is relatively low if we have to go to the first board meeting in April to approve it with the comment changes and still submit it by April 30th.
Right.
But
Especially since we haven't got the final draft.
yeah.
Right.
What's the final document from the state yet, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for mine, but I wanted to add one more quick one, and this is part of what your question, Director Hull, with regards to the important pieces of some of the positive things that we do with the engineering committee. So we have Loma Rica Ranch, which is a big subdivision that's going in, and so we're in a plan check process, right? This is a developer-driven project. They build the project, we just plan check and approve it, inspect it, and then ultimately becomes a district facility when it's all done. And looking at that, we see some real benefit potentially in installing a transmission main through a portion of that subdivision to better increase our fire flows, our peak demand day flows, some of our velocities that get high in some of our peak day demand stuff. Overall system benefits that we see, be able to utilize E-George better for Loma Rica on a peak day demand. Perfect time to do it. There's no pavement on the ground. We can go in there and do it pretty cheaply, relatively speaking. This would be paid by capacity fees because it's the transmission main only, so it would be for capacity fees. And so one of the things we look at when we look at the subdivision is, do we want to try to do that now and utilize capacity fees to install that pipeline? This is something that we would potentially come to the engineering committee and talk to you about with regards to that. Hey, look, we've got this subdivision going in. We think there's a benefit to having some pipeline installed for a transmission section. We want to use capacity fees to pay for it, et cetera. Typically is when you get some blessing from the engineering committee and say, yeah, we agree, why don't you go ahead and do that. We'd ultimately have to go to the board because these fees, this cost would be well, one, the engineering committee has no authority to approve a contract, but it would most likely be above APC anyway, so this would go to the full board. This would just be two board members giving concurrence that it makes sense to try to go out there and do that. So this is one that will be coming up relatively soon with regards to that.
Good.
We think staff believes there's benefit in installing this transmission main. Perfect time to do it. I mean, it can always be done later, but nobody likes to cut up pavement when you can lay it in there when it's just upgrade. It's real cheap and easy.
Yeah.
So
It will be transmission for a separate area from the ranch or part of the ranch?
it will go through the ranch. Basically, we'll go through from Brunswick over to, what's that, Sutton?
Okay,
Sutton,
great.
to improve our flows in different areas within our system.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely we see a benefit there to do that. And like I said, in terms of putting a 16, we're still modeling it to confirm. It's probably going to be a 16 or an 18-inch pipe. But it's the cheapest you're ever going to be able to do it is right now, when the ground's still just ground.
Yeah.
So we'll be bringing that forward to the board at some point here in the near future.
Okay.
So what would have been a committee discussion, yeah, back to your point, what would be a committee discussion, it'd be on staff report, it'd be background, costs, and estimates, and then it would be, sort of blessed by the engineering committee to say, yeah, that's a good idea, say, right? If it has to go to the board, it would at least have been talked about by two committee members. You two would have understood the project a lot deeper, so that when it went to the full board, there was at least some understanding from two board members on a particular project. If we, in the process where we're reducing or minimizing, eliminating committees completely, that would be sort of a workshop component of a board meeting, that all the full board would then hear about it and make reference and talk about it and deliberate about it.
Okay. So I just want to bring that up, the potential that may be coming to the board here.
Yeah, perfect.
With that, I'll hand it over to Hydro to run through there.
All right, so just quick introductions as usual. I'm Ian Summers, Hydroelectric Manager. Nathan Scholes, our project manager, is here with us today. We'll let Nathan run through the actual update, but I did see in Doug's pictures, want to apologize. We don't have pictures. Typically, we're installing computers and, fire suppression emitters, and it's just, it doesn't look great.
Yeah, it's not exciting.
So, with that introduction, we'll go ahead and let Nathan run through the,
So we do want pictures of the Scottsbluff building, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
that'll be a different
video.
The model. We want video of the model, okay?
Yes.
We can't go to Canada to see it.
And that's probably, would be another, thing that this committee could do, right?
Yes.
The committee could, review the detailed modeling results, and we could look at those sorts of things and have a much more in-depth dive into that than
Right.
the board level you would probably do.
Okay.
So, but yes, we'll make sure there's pictures and video and,
Okay. All right, so as Doug mentioned, we're going to run through projects that have had updates since we last spoke about them. I'm going to be jumping around, but feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions about projects that I'm speaking about or others that we talked about last month. That said, let's start under Program 10-2, Hydro Powerhouse Improvements, and I'm going to go down to row 3 for the Chicago Park Powerhouse Fire Suppression System upgrade. This one has gone into construction at the end of January after we last spoke. And so far things are going really well. We're on schedule to finish within 2 to 3 weeks here, and then the system will be commissioned and put into service. The next 3 I'm going to speak about at the same time, so rows 4, 5, and 6. This is for adding fire detection at the Scotts Flat, Combe North, and Combe South powerhouses. The need for this arose after a recent facility inspection by our insurance provider. And so what we've done is we've asked a fire protection engineer to prepare a proposal to design 3 different detection systems for each of these powerhouses so that we can at least be aware of if and when a fire is burning at these remote facilities. These are typically unmanned, so having smoke detection or heat detection would allow us to do that remotely through our SCADA system. So that proposal will be coming in to me over the next week or 2, and then we'll proceed from there. Going down to row 9 for the Rollins Powerhouse Oil Circuit Breaker Replacement Project. Update on this one is that we've received manufacturer's drawings for the breaker, and we've gone ahead and approved those after the review with our engineering consultant for the project. So the breaker is in manufacturing now and is expected to be delivered in late August of this year. So we're still on track for a November installation. Down to Road 10 for the Chicago Park Powerhouse instrumentation upgrade. This project, as I mentioned last month, the design has been completed and we've now moved forward with procurement. And so we've submitted purchase requisitions to the NID purchasing department to help us procure project materials. So we're still on track for an installation this fall for the cooling water system as well. Going on to the next page, unless there's questions. Okay. So we're going to have a look at Row 13 at the top of this list. This is for the Rollins Powerhouse Balance of Plant project. We are well into design now, and I'm expecting our first design submittal for sometime this week. And so over the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about that in-house and doing a review to provide feedback and keep moving forward with the design of the new balance of plant there. If you're not familiar from last time, the balance of plant is kind of like the central controller of the powerhouse. It's able to monitor critical systems such as vibration protection, cooling water, and many others. So adding that at Rollins will be a great improvement to that facility.
So this is expandable. Do we have one now that's not expandable, or how does that work?
So we don't have one now.
We don't have
it is expandable for the future. So for instance, at Chicago Park, I just mentioned we're adding a cooling water system.
Right.
That balance plant was put in back in 2018, I believe. And so now, a few years later down the road, at that time we added vibration protection, and now we're adding cooling water. And it's both of those two systems are tied into this balance of plant to provide real-time monitoring, help us diagnose issues, and possibly more in the future. We're looking to, put as much as we can into these balance of plants for that reason.
So I assume these were things that an operator heard when he walked in the past or saw, rather than actual instruments measuring those things, right? So this is
correct. So essentially, one way you can think about it is in the past there had been gauges and dials for each individual system on various panels throughout the control room of the powerhouse. We're kind of bringing them all into one interface screen, so that instead of having to run around and check everything, like you mentioned, one by one, you can now check on these systems at the same time. Okay. So it does help with efficiency there too. And go ahead.
I was going to say, you'll also be able to see all that remotely, right?
I was going to say, you're going to see that in your office?
Eventually, we will be able to.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And so what we've been doing over the last several years is installing balance plants in some of our larger powerhouses. So, for instance, we started at Bowman, and then I believe we did Chicago Park. Just last year, we've done Dutch Flat, and now we're planning Rollins next. So it's been a series of upgrades throughout our powerhouses to kind of standardize them and bring them up to modern improvements. So, for instance, at Rollins, a lot of these systems that are going to be pulled into the balance plant our original vintage from when the powerhouse was installed back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And for Dutch Flat at Chicago Park, it was even farther back dating back to the 60s. So these are pretty significant upgrades that will really help us to not only operate the system, but also, like I mentioned, we can monitor and help plan preventative maintenance for the future as well.
I think we're also starting to see some return on investment on these investments. At Dutch Flat last month, we had a situation where the powerhouse sensed a problem out on the transmission line, was able to separate itself from the transmission line. It monitored the transmission line. It kept all the water moving, and once it saw that the disturbance had cleared, it reparalleled itself, reconnected to the grid, brought itself back up to load, and went on generating as if nothing had ever happened.
All automatically?
All automatically. In the past, that would have been, it happened in the evening, I can't remember the exact time, but it was in the evening, so we would have been, in the past, called an operator out on double time call-out pay. The operator would have driven out there, seen that everything on the line was as it should be, and then put it back online. So I think that, as these systems become more and more automated, we'll see less and less overtime call-out is the goal of this. So.
Would it be possible, I'm looking at Greg, to visit one of the power plants and, have you already done that?
Some of us have, yes. We had a nice tour.
I would love to understand more about how the systems work together. As you're describing it, Nathan,
balanced plan.
the balance of the plant, yeah, how does it all work together? I think that would be, maybe just Rich and I would wanna see that, but,
Absolutely. No, we'd love to have you out there. We don't
Okay.
get a whole lot of visitors, so.
Yeah.
And that, I think, would really put into perspective what I'm trying to describe here.
Right.
It's a pretty complex system, and I think seeing it on the ground and maybe even seeing how it's used would put that into greater perspective for you. So, yeah.
Okay, so should I coordinate through you,
We
Greg?
can coordinate with Hydro.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good job.
thank you.
All right, let's see here. So that takes care of projects I wanted to talk about under program 10-2. Are there any questions about any remaining projects here or others that I haven't touched on before we move on? Okay.
Well, maybe,
Yeah.
sorry, can I ask a general question? Because as you mentioned, the facilities are so old and it seems like everything's critical. How do you prioritize and determine where to put the, make recommended investments? And given the importance of hydro in contributing financially on the water side, how do you balance what you might, if you were an independent organization and saying, hey, I could do this, that, and the other thing with all the revenue, instead you're saying, I'm gonna do only this. How do you decide that? Where do you put priorities? How do you make these decisions?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of different ways that we look at making these decisions. So first of all, there is at the highest level, Chicago Park usually gets it first, right? It's 40 megawatts, so it is by far our biggest unit. So if there's something that needs to be upgraded, it's the one that gets it. But we do have a matrix that we run through where we look at, criticality, where we look at impacts of the failure. Is it safety critical? Is it environment critical? So there are a handful of ranking criteria that we look at for each one of these jobs when we roll it through. The other one that often gets a lot of attention in terms of powerhouses is Bowman Powerhouse, and that's just because it's so remote out there. So if it's not functioning properly, it is a significant drain on our resources to get people out there to deal with it. So it gets a little bit more attention. But there is a matrix that we generally walk through for each of these jobs to try and figure out when and how and what and in what order.
Okay.
So as we were looking at financial workshops with the board, sort of more in-depth detail on how we operate, what we prioritize, one of the workshops that we've been thinking of is the capital improvement planning, how we go through a matrix of putting money into particular facilities, when and where and why. So from the hydro side, from rec, from ops, and engineering. So that is coming. That's what we're talking about, putting something like this together to the full board pretty soon.
Great.
And that'll help sort of get your minds wrapped around, just from an operational perspective, how does staff work together to determine where funds are going to go when, how do we build budgets around particular projects, and how do we prioritize, set matrices, set priorities amongst some of these facilities. And so that I think is an insight that I'm not sure if the board has really ever seen, but I think it's worth discussing, at least as we move into, future boards and 5-year projections, and what are we spending our money on, and how are we doing it, because that I think will help in understanding where we put money and why. There's always a priority, right? I mean, that's kind of, like you said, everything's critical.
Right.
It's not that one thing is just something, we want to do that.
Right.
Oh, well, geez. I think it'll help board in the future start recognizing why and how we put packages together and funding different processes.
I think that's a great idea, Greg, and I think it ties back to that communication and public outreach too, to help people to understand the magnitude of things. And if we as a board don't understand it, then the public sure as heck can't begin to understand it either. So I really commend that, and I think that'll be very instructive for us. Thank you.
So anecdotally, I asked Keith when we talked about taking over Deer Creek system, the South Yuba Canal and the Deer Creek Powerhouse. He said that thing is 100 years old, and people say, "Oh, this is bad because it's 100 years old." And he he said it could run for another 100 years because it was so well built. It was his response, and I go, okay, so 100 years isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? And I think it's that kind of thing with the whole system. We have good sound equipment, I believe, but they do deteriorate. And getting that in your mind, how big or small that is I was comforted by that statement. That thing was so well built it'll go another 100 years. So, and that's a broad brush, of course.
Yeah.
It was helpful because I was asking the same question. Oh, this Deer Creek, this Southkeeping Canal, and that's why I said I'm anxious to hear the consultant's report on the whole system because of that very thing. You know, is it where is the perspective here? We don't know. The public doesn't know. So, anyway.
You know, that's a good point. That old doesn't mean it's fallen off the cliff, but.
Well, I won't put that same stamp on the South Yuba Canal.
Okay.
Being 100 years old.
Well, that's the portion I'm waiting for. It's one of those. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, let's pick up under program 10-3, hydro dam and water improvements. I have no updates on these projects, but I'll take any questions if we've got them before moving on. Okay.
Can you explain to me again the modeling that's being done and why you felt that was an important step to take? Because this was a significant investment in this area, and I'd just like to understand again, and I know you explained it last time, Nathan, but if you could indulge me and go over that again.
I'm actually going to ask for Ian to support me on this one. This happened a little bit before I joined the district as to the why modeling was the chosen path. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so when you're building structures like this, there is the book that you can go to and pull a standard spillway filling basin out of and apply that to these larger projects, right? There are. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can we take a step back? What's the problem statement with the Scotch Flat spillway?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Well, and maybe this is. I mean, we can go high level today, but this
that's
there
fine.
there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation and presentation and whatnot that have led us to where we are today.
Okay.
So if we go back to 2016, 2017, where we had a high flow year, we noticed a pretty significant amount of spalling on the spillway out there, so concrete just coming off in chunks.
Okay.
There were several sections where we lost fairly large panels out there, 20 feet wide by 20 feet wide squares of the top of the concrete coming off.
And this is down at the bottom of the spillway, right?
It was kind of throughout the spillway.
Oh, I understood it just at the bottom, so it's not unlike Oroville situation.
Well, so it's definitely unlike Oroville in that we still had a whole lot of concrete left.
Okay.
Right? There were sections of their spillway that
The whole thing, hill, fell off the side of the hill.
But we chased this problem back even to the original construction of the spillway out there. They poured the concrete in the middle of December, and it looks like they didn't keep it warm enough when it was poured. We have pictures of just gigantic smudge pots out there that they'd light, but then they went home for the weekend and put them out and just left them. And so there's some concrete quality problems out there. So then we did a substantial investigation into the condition of the spillway. We did a substantial investigation into the potential risk of the spillway, which led us through this process that the lower portions of the older portion of the spillway needs to be significantly overhauled. Now, what does that look like? Is it a remove and replace? Is it just an overlay on top of it? That's what we're in the process of deciding right now. And so that's what the model is going to help us determine is what does this solution physically look like out there? Is it something where we could go to a textbook sort of and pull out a typical structure and put it in there for the bottom portion of the spillway? When we did that, it came out gigantic. The walls were 50 feet tall. It was really just a ridiculous solution. So when you start to see stuff like that, then we'll go to a more complex solution, which is this modeling. And so what they will do is physically build a replica of the model run water down that, see where the scour occurs, see how it occurs, see when it occurs, see where it progresses to, and that'll really allow us to optimize the design out there, so we come up with a one-off solution that works for our situation.
And also gets regulatory buy-in, right? This is a process that the DSOD and FERC are very familiar with. So when we decide to come something outside of the standard box with the modeling backup, they're going to be favorable to that, and then ultimately the idea is that's going to save us money.
At that time, I said, will they accept the modeling? They said yes.
Yeah, we expect the modeling will save us hundreds of thousands of dollars, even into the millions of dollars range, once we come up with this optimized solution. So in construction, it'll save that money, so.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
no, that's very helpful. Perfect.
That's 4 or 5 years worth of work in.
Very good. Yeah, no, very good.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Good. All right. Looking down at program 10-4, Hydro Lower Division Waterway Improvement. I have no significant updates to report on this, so I'll take questions as well, or we can move on to program 10-5. Okay, let's go on. So under program 10-5 for Hydro Upper Division Waterway Improvement, I want to share an update on row 3 for the Texas Creek Bloom Repair Project. We are currently doing work to plan a repair for the exposed weathered foundation, bedrock, and adjacent ground surface where the spillway off of the flume has been discharging water for many decades. That design package is going to be completed sometime this month, and then we'll go to FERC and DSOD for their review. Construction is still planned to occur this year. And lastly, I'm going to jump down to 10-6 now. There was a project that was resurrected and re-added to this list. That is row 2 here, so I just want to let you know that that one has actually been shut down, and we have decided to move into a radio study, which was absolved into row 1, project number 2405 under this program. So you won't see row 2 again in the future. Just wanted to clear that up. But those are our hydro updates. So if you have any other questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you again next month.
No.
Yeah.
We'll know more next week.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there any other, before we talk about your question here at the end, maybe is there any further comments from committee members? If not, we'll open it up if there's any public comment on the projects themselves, and then we'll come back to the discussion.
That's fine.
Good work. And a lot of important things that you're doing, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking the time to bring me up to speed. Chris is already up to speed.
Me too, yeah.
So is there any public comment with regards to the project status update? Seeing any? Star 9? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close item number 3. 3? 2. Go ahead and close item number 2. And now we can chat a little bit about your question, Director Hull, with regards to what were some of the positive aspects of the committee. I think one of them is project discussions, and that can include ones like I had just mentioned with the Loma Rica, potentially coming forward with the installation of a transmission main. Also, the larger projects, like Comby, for instance, we were working on that when I got here 16 years ago. Those very large projects, those big capital projects, they're kind of a slow burn. They take a while to get to a point where we're building them. And we spent a lot of time in the engineering committee talking about that, talking about different options, talking about how we're going to fund it, some of those types of things, right, that we bring to the committee and have those discussions. That's an important part of what some of the positive information that we get back from committee members is they give us direction. Yeah, it makes sense that we build this project and that we should go ahead and bond for it. So then we start that process versus, you know what, no, we don't want to be going into debt for this. Let's figure out another way to do it or spread it out over more years, et cetera, right? So that was good information, good feedback from the committee members Another one is just the projects in general, having the project update. It gives you guys an opportunity to hear what we're doing, because otherwise you don't really get a feel for what the department's working on. And some of the reasons why, I think as we potentially try this new process, I think what we'll need to do is have better information in our project description. Before, they've been a little more bland, because we can just have a discussion here very easily. You can say, well, what is this one about? We can go into the detail. So we'll probably need to give a little information with regards to that, but that was another component, right? You guys had an opportunity to get a feel for what we're doing and the projects that are being developed, within the capital program. So I think that was an important one. And then the other one, to a lesser degree, was just potential changes in the department. We wanted to make some ideology changes. You kind of mull that through with the engineering committee. They wouldn't necessarily, it's not something that the board would have to weigh in on. It's not something the committee would have to necessarily weigh on, but, it was just an opportunity to chat with the committee members about some things that be changing internally just for improvements in process, et cetera. So, I don't know if there's any, and Hydro is just kind of new to the game in terms of being here at the engineering committee.
I think that it does, I do appreciate the opportunity to kind of dive into the details like Scott's flat, because it is going to be one of those long burn type of jobs that Doug mentioned. It's going to take several years to go from problem identification through the solution, and having at least some level the directors know what's going on and the path that we got there. There's value to that.
Good.
The only thing I'd add to their comments is that committees are a good opportunity to bounce ideas. Staff's always running every day with multiple different items and have to make decisions moving forward. And on a monthly basis, it was always a good opportunity to make sure that some of those decisions are in step with the will and the values of two of the board members, right? Of course, when something big or monumental would come up, then that brings forth an idea that is recommended to the board for approval or for direction. But there is always this check-in and this opportunity for direction and feedback. When we adjust this process and have these, and we'll talk more about sort of what the value of the committee and how that parlays over into kind of a workshop component of a board meeting. It may even be better in that situation. It just depends on how much noodling the different staff need input from the board versus the committee. So
I see the evolution of this change idea having a big part to do with a whole new board in 2 years, right?
Right.
Where in the past there were board members that had been on these committees, they'd been part of it, they trusted the systems, they didn't have to have the updates that we're asking for.
Right.
The things that I don't know, I still don't know, I still have questions after 2 years. So I'm one of those, it's split between, which way should we go? And I like the idea of more information about projects and how they get, the questions you're asking are still valid for me today too, so. And we'll work through that, I think the model we've chosen is pretty good, to leave the committees in place and just not schedule meetings if we don't deem them necessary or not fitting the new parameters, so.
Yeah. Well, I know that I value very much this, this committee gives me an opportunity to learn about the district in ways that I wouldn't have learned using the existing model of committees plus the board meetings. I wouldn't have learned what I'm learning now, so I don't have that ability with the WHO committee or others, so I appreciate the consolidation of it. Gives me a chance to learn, as Chris is saying, I think at a more rapid pace to be more helpful. And I also think that members of the public really value these updates about, especially those key projects that are more controversial, perhaps. And so I think that in the spirit of the transparency, continuing that will be a real positive thing. And so I like what you identify as the positive aspects of this committee and how that translates into the new structure.
Okay.
And it seems like some of the shortcomings of the committee structure are going to be overcome by the new model too, which I would identify the kind of having to repeat the same information.
Yeah, right, not that it's, I mean, it's just the board that we're in, right? The fact that we
Right.
are so new and so some of that, you know, the information needs to be known, and so giving it once versus twice.
Yeah.
There's some benefit to that, right? Whereas like Reagan said before, that sometimes you would just put stuff on consent after going through a committee because the other board members were so familiar with the process and the committees, et cetera, that you know, there wasn't that learning curve to deal with.
Right. Okay, good.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, we'll go ahead and close out the engineering committee. Thank you, everyone.